We're live, so welcome to Heller Barnes. And this week we have a fantastic guest here, Bob, and I'll have Johnny tell you about him. But Johnny, how you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you for inquiring. Looking forward to the Thanksgiving holiday. In spite of all the varied horrors we're discussing, there's a great deal to be thankful for all the time. So you got to look at the bright side of life, which reminds you of a song. Yeah. So here we have the lovely and talented Bob Souer, the second nicest guy in the business. Bob, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Johnny. And Dawn. It's a delight to be here.
I like how he threw
Well,
me in there under the bus at
Oh,
the end.
yeah, you know, I
under
thought
the bus is my specialty. Yeah.
I thought we should do the show like kinda Canadian style. Just go, "Hey, Bob. Hey, Johnny. Hey,
Hey,
Don. Hey,
Hey,
Johnny.
hey,
Hey,
hey.
Bob,"
yeah,
and then say hello for a while, and then just kinda sit for a while, just kinda, "How are you now?"
yeah.
Just let
Real good.
just
It's
let
sort of like a Minnesota farewell. It takes
yeah, yeah. "Hey, how you
half an hour to 45
uh,
minutes.
how are you now?" "Okay." Anyway, so welcome to our show. So Bob is one of my he really is. I don't know who if he's the second nicest guy.
Well, wait, how do people know he's a nice guy at all? Where did you come up with that kind of crap?
Yeah, he made it up for himself.
Oh,
Yeah, that's it.
Actually, I did not. A
Ah.
good friend of mine named Doug Turkel in 2009, we were at the first FAFCon, which was a voiceover unconference. In other words, we didn't come in with a big agenda. Everybody came with questions and ideas, and we all just had a meeting at the beginning of the weekend to decide what we were going to talk about. We stuck the ideas up on the wall. We picked which ideas looked the most appealing to us, and we went to them. That was FAFCon. It's anyway, and the unconference idea. But uh, Doug Turkel and I were talking before the first meeting, and I had just launched a website. It's since been replaced. The one that's there now is more recent than that. But in 2009, I had just done a revision of my website because I had earlier that year left my corporate job and just started working voiceover full time. And Doug said, Bob, I like your website. I think it's terrific. And I like your slogan, professional storyteller. Uh, and I said, thank you. And he said, but I think you need to find some way to make it more personal so that people can understand something about you as a person, not just your professional standing or style. And so he turned to me and he said, look at this room full of people here. What does everybody here think of you? And I said, honestly, I don't know, Doug. And he said, well, I'll tell you, they all think you're the nicest guy in voiceover. So if you could find some way to incorporate that, that would help to make it more personal. Well, I spent the whole day thinking about it. I thought, I can't say I'm the nicest guy. I mean, I can't claim to be number one. That's not me. I just can't do it. Well, at dinner that night, after the first day of the event was done, I suddenly started thinking about those old Avis commercials. We're number two, we try harder.
Yeah, yeah.
And I turned to one of the other people there and I said, to Amy Snively, who's actually started the whole FAFCON thing. And I said, Amy, I think I've got it. And I told her the story about how Doug had told me this that morning. And I said, I could say I'm the second nicest guy. And she said, that's brilliant, Bob. But everybody's going to ask you
Who's first?
who's number one, right? So she said, this is what you do. So, Johnny, if you'd be so kind as to ask me that question.
Bob, who's you're the second nicest guy. Who's number one? Who's the nicest guy?
I can't talk about it. It's too painful. Now, Amy did that. Look down, look a little click up through the corner of the eye. I can't talk about it. It's too painful. And I laughed out loud when she said it to me. And every time that I've ever had somebody do that for me, they all have laughed. Why? Because there's a sort of, wink and nod and all of that sort of thing. I don't know all the psychology of it, but it tickles your funny bone. Now, what I learned very quickly is I can't do that in an email
Yeah,
or on the phone because they can't see the face. They can't see the
doesn't work. Yeah.
expression. So I've learned that the other way that I have to answer that is if somebody says in an email, who's number one, I answer, would the nicest guy in voiceover claim to be the nicest? And most people come back with something along the lines of, I get it.
You should write some jerk. I don't know his name.
But his initials are Johnny Heller.
That's right.
Anyway, yes.
Well, when you go to Don's website or my website, we don't have things like the nicest guy, because we wouldn't ask a room full of people what they thought of him.
Yeah, I avoid
Well,
that kind of question.
It wasn't my idea. It was
Yeah.
Doug. So
I mean, it'll change the whole nature of our website and our marketing.
anyway, that's where it came from, though, was the idea that, I
Well,
mean, it is a
you are-
goal to be nice to people. And, I know nice has sort of become kind of almost a bad word. Kindness has sort of begun to replace it. Well, I equate niceness and kindness as essentially the same thing, or at least that's how it is in my heart. So being kind to people and being nice to people, in my mind at least, is the same thing.
in my experience with you, which goes back many years, seriously, one of the nicest, most genuine, kindest people I've had the honor to know and call a friend. We've known each other. We talked about it before the show since we said 2000 to 2012. Here, tell the kids how we met, Bob.
Well, yes, and Johnny doesn't remember this, of course, because I was just a face in the crowd back then. But at the 2012 APAC was the first Audio Publishers Association convention, APAC, that I attended. And Johnny was back then doing an event at the end of the day called the Listener's Lounge. And he would organize a bunch of very, very talented narrators to read pieces that they had selected as a demonstration of their skill. And it was commonplace for somebody to read something that was funny, but it wasn't required. I do remember Johnny introducing the two British Simons, Simon Prebble and Simon Vance. As I recall, Prebble was first and Vance was second in that particular list that day. But anyway, I went up afterward and said hello and how much I had enjoyed the event. And that was when we first met in person. So
how many years ago was that?
What's that?
2012, 12 years ago.
12 years ago.
12 and a half, yeah.
The Listener's Lounge, actually, I'll throw a little shade here because Bob's too nice to, but I used to be heavily involved in APAC. I'm not at all. I'm not even a member of the APA anymore. But when the Listener's Lounge is something I put together, and the idea was, at the end of the day, hey, if you do your work and this is what you want to be, one of these people, Katie Kellgren and Simon Prebble, Simon Vance, Barbara Rosenblatt, just some really big time, great names.
And Johnny Heller
would come. They'd come and we do a thing, and it was just nice. And then after that, to have a cocktail lounge, and it really went. I think we did it 3 to 4 years, and then they decided not to have that or me back, and and then they changed it. So now it's not quite the same. But at the New England Narrator Retreat, where we all hang out, we had a listener lounge there for a while, and we changed that. But the very idea is to the original idea of the Listener's Lounge, the whole point was to show people what it's like when everything works. And it was also fun. This is people forget in our business, the end user needs to be enjoying what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever Bob he's a nonfiction audiobook narrator. And assuming, you look at at the Audible listing of books he's got, and there's a whole lot of Christian stuff, a whole lot of theology stuff, a whole lot of philosophy stuff, and a great deal of history stuff. All those things are interesting to me. And you listen to him, and Bob Souer has a kind of sound and a kind of authority and a kind of sincerity that really, really makes these books, even books that you might think, just totally palatable and interesting and fascinating. And it's really kind of neat. Which what brings me to this. Tell us about your very first voiceover gig.
Well, my very first voiceover gig was while I was still in college in 1974. I was engaged at the time, and
while you were engaged, while you were in college?
Yes.
Didn't you understand what the whole point of college was?
Well, not that way. But my fiance was 4 years older than me, so she had already graduated, and she was working at a publishing company, and they were getting ready to go to a booksellers convention, and they were having a meeting, and she was on the committee that was part of this planning committee for the convention. And they realized during the course of the meeting that they had this what was in 1974, what passed for a multimedia display, which was a slide projector, carousel, and a little screen that went in front of it and a projector, and then a cassette that would have the audio on it. That was a multimedia projector and presentation in 1974. Well, they realized they hadn't budgeted and allocated a budget for a voiceover to go with the slides that were going to be presented. And my fiance said, well, my fiance, the guy I'm going to be marrying next year, has a really nice voice. I was studying to be an opera singer back then. And she said, you could ask him. I'm sure he'd be willing to do it for a modest amount of money. I was putting myself through college. I was poor as the proverbial church mouse. So Kathy calls me up and says, you're going to get a call from my boss. And if he likes the way you sound over the phone, he's going to hire you to do a voiceover job. That was the first time I ever heard the term voiceover job. And so the guy calls and I talk to him for a couple of minutes and he says, yeah, you'll do. Meet me at such and such a place in domain communications in, I was going to college in the Chicago area, and Carroll Stream is a suburb west of Chicago, and that's where Domain is located. Oasis Audiobooks is also headquartered there now.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I went there, I did the session, and I mentioned that I was poor. Well, I could not afford, I had been given a family heirloom diamond to use for the engagement ring, but I couldn't even pay for the setting to put the diamond into. Well, they paid me $150 for the session, and that paid for the setting, for the ring to put the diamond into. So I was able to get officially engaged.
Aw.
So that was my very first job. Now, I don't count my voiceover business from then, though, because it took me 9 years till 1983 before I got my second job. So let me quickly tell you that. At the time, I was working for a radio station, and the boss, the general manager of the station, in a fit of generosity, had invited the entire staff out to lunch, except me. I was doing middays. It was an easy listening station, 1983, beautiful music station. And I was the staff announcer doing middays. So I was there, and he even took the receptionist. So in addition to being on the air, I had to answer the phone. And I had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with me to have for lunch. And I'm sitting there in the studio having a big pity party for myself because everybody else was getting a nice free lunch at a restaurant, and I was eating my peanut butter sandwich. And then the phone rings, and I answer it. And the guy, no, I had finished my sandwich. The guy at the other end of the line says that he and his brother have started this video production company, and they listen to our radio station, and he wants to know, does anybody there do voiceover work? And I said, what about me? And he said, do you have a demo tape? I said, come by the station at 3 o'clock this afternoon, and I can give you my demo. So, and I gave him directions on how to get there. So when my friend Todd Beasley, who remains one of my good friends to this day, gets back, he's the production manager of the station. He gets back and I say, Todd, this phone call came in while you guys were out at lunch, and I got to get a demo tape together. And I'm just freaking out. And Todd says, never, calm down, Bob, we'll get a demo tape together for you. So we rolled some of my commercials onto a cassette tape and typed up a file folder label, Bob Souer's voiceover demo, put it in a jewel case, and the guy comes by at 3 and I give it to him. Now this was in probably June of 1982. In April of 1983, I have gone to work for one of the stations downtown in Chicago, a union station, which is how I happened to end up joining AFTRA.
What station, do you know?
WAIT is what it was called,
Yeah.
another beautiful music station.
Because, I was in Chicago this whole time.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there you go. Although we didn't know each other back then.
No.
Anyway, so the operations manager calls me over to the phone and says, you got a phone call, and I pick up the phone, and the guy at the other end of the line says, I don't know if you remember, but 9 months ago you auditioned for this voiceover job for us. And I said, oh, I remember. I didn't tell him it was the only voiceover audition I'd done in the last 9 months. And he says, well, we went through a bunch of people and they've decided they want you. And I said, really? He said, yes. So it's these two guys who had been wedding videographers who had started a industrial or corporate video
Yeah.
production company. And they went from that. I go in, I do that voiceover job, which I continued working for that client until only about 5 years ago. They just kept hiring me and hiring me over all these years. Anyway, so these two brothers had gone from that to a multi-million-dollar corporate video production company in the next 4 years, and I did all the voiceovers for them during that time, except for the few
Wow.
that they had a client who wanted to do their own. So that was literally my on-the-job training on doing narrations and corporate stuff and e-learning style stuff. I did training for UPS. In fact, for years, if you started working as a preloader at UPS, you had to listen to my voice telling you how to lift the boxes and where to put them. And Motorola, in fact, you might remember ISDN. It's come and gone since then,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it was a way of getting studio quality audio to anywhere in the world with an ISDN line and the appropriate boxes at each end. I did the original training video for the installers of the first ISDN switches for the phone company
Wow.
for
Oh.
Bell Labs back when they were first developing the technology. So that's some of the stuff that I ended up getting to do, and that all started in, like I said, in April of 1983 with that first voiceover job, and I
Because
never looked back.
you go back that far and probably further than most of our probably before most of our listeners and watchers were
We're
even
even
born.
born.
Yeah, let me, when your first I remember my first demo tapes were reel to reel. Did you do
Yeah.
that?
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
We had
Well,
real
for a long
because
time.
yeah, in those days, you had that demo was a reel to reel, and you brought it into your like an agent. So an agent really had to be interested in hearing you because the process wasn't even as simple as putting a cassette into a cassette
No,
player.
no,
They had to put a reel to reel onto the
correct.
reel,
They
spool
had
it
to have
up,
a
listen.
reel machine in their office to
They need a
listen to
machine.
it.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yep.
Well, I
Those are
remember the
crazy
first
days.
time I did that, I was sitting there just literally jumping around inside my skin. I mean, I tried to look calm and collected, but I'm listening to this guy listening to my tape. He shuts it off after about, I don't know, 45 seconds maybe. And I think to myself, oh, that's it. He's going to throw me out of his office. And the guy says, oh, I think we've got a place for you. So
Oh, that's
apparently I made a good first impression.
Where'd you go to school?
I went
College?
to Trinity College, now called Trinity International University in Deerfield, Illinois. I grew up in
Oh,
north central Minnesota, but my church that was affiliated with that college, and it was down to Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, or Trinity in Deerfield, Illinois. But because I was a member of the church that was affiliated with Trinity, I got an extra $500 scholarship. That was the difference, and I ended up going to Trinity instead of to
oh.
Moorhead.
Did you ever work while you were in Chicago for Unshackled at Moody Bible?
I did not. I was there for a couple
Really?
of the
You were
recording sessions, but I never did any recording for them.
what a natural you'd be. We worked
Um,
for that was a SAG. You know what this was? I'll tell you. It was a SAG after thing. It was Moody Bible. It was called Unshackled.
mm-hmm.
It was a program that ran on the weekends, as I recall, and they had they had you'd rehearse during the week, and it was always like the come to Jesus stories. So either it was a husband who was just screwing up, and somebody, or as a kid, it was always somebody who went off the wayward path, and somebody talking about Jesus, and then he came back. So that was a story all the time. And because I always played the kid who went bad, and we
Typecast.
did it. We would
Typecasting
do it.
like
This
that,
was the
Johnny?
cool thing. Yeah, shocking. We would do this at the Moody Bible Institute down where the hobos would come in for breakfast and
Mm-hmm.
coffees, and you do it live in front of a room full of the hobos, for what we called them in those days, unhoused people, which had its own little interesting because it was a live show. So you'd hear things, smell things, see things. But the cool thing was they had a Foley artist.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
So if it was a rainy day, the guy would do, and you'd see all the stuff happening. So that was, I would think, Bob, that you would have been a natural for Unshackled. They
Well,
still do it, as far as I'm concerned.
I did a bunch of voiceovers for Moody over the years,
Yeah,
but never Unshackled. Nobody ever
I'm
even talked to me
surprised.
about it. So,
Oh,
so
had I known you then, I would have hooked you into that group because it was fun. I mean, it
I'm
was
sure
you
it
know,
was.
it was union money, it was a union
Yeah.
gig. It's all AFTRA before SAG and AFTRA merged.
Yeah.
So tell us about your audiobook career. When did that start?
So
How's that going?
I had been doing voiceovers from 1983 on, April of 1983, working at it steadily, although I always had some kind of other job. I worked until 2001 in radio. And then after that, I took a job in 2001 with the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, and I worked for their company, writing and voicing and producing. And um, and then, but I started getting more and more voiceover work, and until the point where I literally was working 2 full-time jobs. I would come home from work and immediately go to work on corporate jobs and that sort of thing until midnight, and then I'd sleep until 7 o'clock the next morning and get up and do it all over again. And then on Saturdays, I'd usually have almost the whole day in the studio. And uh, I was doing work through online casting, mainly voice123.com and voices.com. And there was a job posted on voices.com for narrating the Bible for Thomas Nelson Publishers, the world's largest publisher of English language Bibles. They wanted to do a podcast version of the Bible in which, over the course of a year, you would listen to the entire Bible with selections from the Old Testament, from the Psalms and Proverbs, and from the New Testament. Obviously, the Psalms and Proverbs are from the Old Testament, but the Psalms, especially 150 chapters, it's the biggest book in the Bible for sure. So they would split it up that way. And they were looking to cast somebody to voice this entire narration of the Bible. Well, I threw my hat in the ring, which was to read the first Genesis of chapter one of Genesis. And I submitted my audition, and a few weeks later, they contacted me to say, we want you. And now, that was in 2006. I didn't actually start narration until the following year. It was later in the year in 2006. So I flew out to Los Angeles to take an audiobook narration workshop with Pat Fraley and Hillary Huber after I'd been booked for the job, but before I started narrating it, just to get some idea of what it was that I was in for. And of course, but narrating the entire Bible, well, let's say I jumped in the deep end of the audiobook pool right away from the beginning. If I hadn't had an engineer and a director assigned to me by the production studio that was actually doing the recording, we did it all ISDN. I was in North Carolina then working for Billy Graham, and the studio was in Nashville where Thomas Nelson's headquartered. And we connected on ISDN every day for 4 hours, Monday through Friday, and then 6 hours on Saturday. And if I hadn't had an engineer and a director, I'd probably still be working on that project because I had absolutely no idea what I was getting into. But
it's a good thing the rapture didn't happen during that. You wouldn't be able to finish the project.
They would have been left with an incomplete version, I guess. In any case, what I concentrated on, and this was somewhat based on what I learned from Pat and Hillary, was to concentrate on telling the story and telling it as straight and well as I could, but to concentrate on telling the story, not worrying about, was I saying the words? I mean, they gave me pronunciation so I could say the words correctly, but there was no, I wasn't trying to act anything. I was simply trying to tell the story of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation as well as I could. And it worked out relatively well, I guess. Then after that, I did a few fiction pieces, and I discovered that although I have an acting background, but I didn't, in order to do fiction well, you have to understand the point of view of the story, right? Who's the narrator? Who's the person who's telling the story, from whose point of view, and what are their feelings and so forth. You have to understand all of those things. And if you don't,
Right.
you're probably not going to do a very good job of telling that story because, you got to focus on these things that the author has put in the story. But if you don't pick up on them as you're reading them, that would be a problem. You also have to, go through the whole thing before you start so you know how it ends. But that is true to some extent with nonfiction, but if I'm in a really tight bind, I will confess I don't always read all the way to the end of the book
Well, you
before I
pretty much
start.
knew what was going to happen in the Bible. Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
I had read to the end of the Bible before, so I knew in that case. But anyway, I just did not find myself after the Bible project was finished and I started doing a few other audiobook projects. I did not find a lot of joy in that process of developing the voices and the characters for the people that I was playing and so forth. I remember doing a murder mystery thing that was set in Mississippi. So it was Mississippi, but there were characters from Tennessee and Kentucky and North Carolina. And well, maybe John, I'm sure, and maybe Don does too, that those are different accents. Mississippi is not the same as North Carolina, is not the same as Tennessee, is not the same as Texas. And, so I had to, learn these dialects and all of these other things. This stuff did not fill me with joy. And I discovered that I loved finding and the thread, the overarching story that's in nonfiction. So very early on, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to concentrate in doing nonfiction. I know it's saying no to 80% of the potential work that I could do, but, life is short, and why not concentrate on the stuff you really enjoy doing and don't worry about the stuff you don't? So that's what I've done, and that's why I only do nonfiction for, my own personal intention.
How many times now have you done the Bible? Have you done 3 times?
3 times, correct. I did that
Yeah.
first one for Thomas Nelson. Then a few years later, a studio also in Chicago hired me to help with a production of the new international version of the Bible for Zondervan Publishing. That one I didn't narrate the entire Bible, though. I was sort of the narrator through the thread line of the whole thing, but they had other people playing Jesus and the apostles and Moses and King David and so forth. So I wasn't the voice of every word of the entire Bible that time. And then the third time, wrapped up about a year ago, I was contacted out of the blue by a Texas billionaire who was a devout Christian believer, and he wanted to make a version in a contemporary translation of the Bible in English, but that would be available everywhere in the world at no charge to anyone. You didn't have to have a live internet connection. Well, you'd eventually have to, because you'd have to download the audio, but it could all be yours for free. I believe the website is audiobible.org. And I think they're still completing the development of all of this stuff. But he had listened to every solo narration of the Bible in English. And not the whole thing, I suppose. He only listened to some
I'm
parts.
glad you see what Sherry. Can you read Sherry Galpert's question there?
Hello from Boston, gentlemen.
Did he want to change the
Bible podcast? Did you get to interview Moses? No, I did not interview Moses. He
did he want to change the ending?
Yeah, no, I did not. I just read it the way it was written, and in that case, it was the New King James version of the Bible. So
the King James version, but so the versions you've done, King James and some of the more modern versions,
it's a different translation.
What's that?
New King James is a more modern version. That one's still under copyright to Thomas Nelson, and then the New International version is copyright to Zondervan. And then the third version was the Berean Standard Bible, which is copyright to the Bible Hub, I think.
Do you remember I think it was in the 70s, I think it's called the Good News Bible. It was very, I remember that one. They was trying to really make it as simple as they could.
If you read it now, it doesn't look quite
hey, how's it going there? Well, it's quite, I mean, here's the thing. It's wonderful for you, being who you are, feeling how you feel, believing what you believe, to get to do all those things.
Indeed.
Because that's a double bonus for you, and I know that I appreciate it, and I know that you appreciate it, and that's kind of neat. So tell us more. So your audiobook career outside the Bible,
right?
How is that
for a few years? I just worked for a few small publishers or independent people who came along and found me and hired me. But then when I had been out in California in 2006, both Pat and Hillary had said, you really should go to APAC. So in 2012, when you and I met for the first time, Johnny, I went to New York City where it was being held, as it has been quite a few times over the years. And at the end of the day, because most of the years it's been held, it's a single day, starting early in the morning and ending in late in the
Yeah.
afternoon. And then in the evening, there's often a few after parties sponsored by various people. And so my friend Melissa and I sneaked into the Tantor after party. I will confess here that we did not have an invitation, but we managed to sneak in. And I'm not the most outgoing person in the world. In fact, I'm painfully shy and very, I have a really hard time mingling in crowds. I'm not good at small talk and that kind of thing. So I found a quiet, or as quiet as I could. It was a New York bar, for Pete's sake. It's the sound of an airplane taking off. But I found as quiet a spot in the corner as I could, and I just sat down, and people who I knew or who knew me would come over and sit down and talk with me for a while, and then they'd move on. And I just stayed there until late after the party had been going for a couple of hours. And then my friend Melissa came over and said, "Is there anybody you wanted to meet?" And I had heard of Grover Gardner by that time. And I thought, oh, if he's here, I'd sure love to meet him. And so I told Melissa that, and she said, "Oh, he's right over there by the bar." She grabbed my hand and dragged me across the room. And so Grover was talking to somebody. I don't remember who it was. I maybe don't even remember what they look like. But anyway, we stand there for a few minutes, and then Grover pauses in his conversation, and Melissa goes, "Grover, you got to meet this guy. His name's Bob Souer, and he's narrated the Bible twice." So that was my introduction to Grover. Grover looks at me for a minute, and he says, "I might have a job for you." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Mr. Black is a Christian, and he wants to find somebody to narrate Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion, which is almost as big as the Bible and involves a lot more Latin and Greek and Hebrew than reading the Bible in an English translation does." So it's a pretty challenging project. It's long. And I said, "Well, I'd love to." He said, "Really?" I said, "Absolutely." He said, "How's your Latin?" I said, "It's passable." I didn't tell him that I had studied to be an opera singer and had learned a lot of church Latin from
Right.
singing lots of stuff in Latin. So I had to learn how to pronounce that. And anyway, and I knew there were resources that I could turn to for Greek and Hebrew as well. So he says, "Well, I'll get in touch with you, but I'm inclined to give you this job." Well, that was in May of 2012. And my friend Melissa ran into Grover a few months later and said, "Hey, if you need Bob Souer's contact information, I have it." And he says to her, "I know how to get a hold of Bob Souer." Okay. So a few months after that, in November of that same year, 2012, I get an email from Grover saying, "Do you want the institutes in hard copy or as a PDF?" And I said, "A PDF, please." Well, it was so big, the PDF, that they couldn't email it to me as an attachment. They had to put it on their website, on their FTP server, and then send me the
Yeah.
login details so I could download it. And I got to work on it. It took 14 months, pardon me, because I was working on other books at the same time. But, and I asked him right away, I said, "Would it be okay if we did this under union contracts?" And he said, "Sure, no problem." So that, provided me with enough union income to cover my health insurance for 2 years while I was working on
Yeah.
that. But, so yeah, I'd already qualified before that, but that kept it going for those next 2 years because that was a big project.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's how and then the following year, I met Hillary Urich at APAC, and she agreed to give me a trial. And so I've been working for Blackstone and Tantor ever since 2012, 2013. And,
That's great.
happily so. And all of it nonfiction. I mentioned to Hillary when I met her in 2013, I said, "I only do nonfiction." And she said, "That's okay." And so they've sent me, and then since then they've acquired Christian Audio. So they've sent me quite a few titles that are specifically Christian. And then through Tantor and Highbridge, Um, Mostly those two imprints. They've sent me lots of other, history and biography and that kind of nonfiction stuff. And I love doing that stuff. I mean, there's something about, you learn so much. Johnny, you've probably had the same experience when you've done nonfiction things. It's not that there's nothing to learn from fiction titles, but in nonfiction, you got an author who's filled with passion for some subject matter, and
Oh yeah.
you get to share in that excitement and that enthusiasm the whole way through.
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, because it depends what the topic is. I particularly like. I mean, I've done a lot of Christian nonfiction, a lot of stuff, so you learn things. But certainly the military history things are always interesting to me. I just did a book that's out. That's it's so important. It's Patrick Kennedy, so not the bad Kennedy, but a good Kennedy, who wrote a book, Profiles in Mental Health Courage, which is such an important book. It's a story about, because John Kennedy did Profiles in Courage, a Pulitzer Prize winning book. So his nephew does Profiles in Mental Health Courage, and it's a story of, I think it's 12 individuals, and not all of them even lived through the story, but it's all about, because mental health is so important, and it's something we're paying more attention to it now than ever before, and it's important. So that kind of you learn all kinds of things, or you finally face some truths that you've been trying not to face. So there's a great challenge in nonfiction. The greatest challenge, I think, we can talk about that. The greatest challenge for me in nonfiction is taking what is ostensibly a dry, uninteresting topic, even uninteresting to you, the narrator, and acting in such a way that it's not dry or uninteresting, so that the listener never has any idea that you don't like this. And
Well,
I think that's a key to a great.
Yeah, Paul Rubin gave me the key to unlock that. At least for me, it has. Quite some time ago, I heard him doing a talk on nonfiction narration, and the one phrase that he used in the course of that has really stuck in my mind is, he said, "Look, to the author of a nonfiction title, on a scale of
And
1
going
to
forward,
10,
if you're looking to
the
stream
level
on
of interest of
Twitch,
the author in
YouTube,
this subject is
Facebook,
40."
all at the same time, this is
You
going
know,
to be
in
the
other
way
words,
that you want to do it.
the
Even
author
TikTok,
cares so
assuming
much about
TikTok
this, is
stops
so
being
passionate
assholes
about it.
and lets us have stream
And,
keys,
I
it's probably going
find
to
the
add
same
a
thing
new
is true,
dock
for
to OBS
example,
where you can
in
add all your
narrating
different
e-learning
accounts
or
for
corporate things. Quite often, those things are really dry. You're doing a HR intake narration that lasts for 45 minutes as you explain all the details of the way the company operates. Well, to you or me, since we're not going to work for that corporation, we really don't care. But to the listener and to the HR person who's presenting it, it's of incredible importance, because if you don't get that stuff and get it right, you can get in trouble. You could get fired. I mean, there's all. So to me, the acting job is finding that passion that the author has and then delivering that.
Exactly right.
Not
Finding the
shouting,
passion's the key.
right? Yeah, not shouting, not overdoing it, but
Well,
what do you mean by
here's Don Baarns, who's absolutely passionate about Studio One and engineering and voice tech stuff. He's passionate. He speaks passionately about it. Now, I don't know what he's talking about. And when he talks to me and helps me set things up, he's aware of my lack of understanding and total desire not to know anything about it. But I appreciate his love for it. And anybody can relate to passion and to love and to that emotion. You don't have to. If I do a story about photosynthesis, my book's on photosynthesis, that's kind of uninteresting, especially in real time. But if I'm a whatever the hell you call a plant guy, if that's
Plantologist.
what I love, what do you call them?
Plantologist.
What?
Or botanist.
I don't know.
Botanist or whatever the hell. Or perhaps even a gardener. It means the world to them, and I can relate to that. I did a book once. Oh my God, I forget what it's called, but it's all about beer. And I thought it'd be great stories about, drinking beer and, passing out. But no, it was all about the history of beer, like when monks made it and ancient Byzantines. And it's all this science and crap. Well, I think when you listen to it, you can't tell that I was just bored. I did all of Dr. Oz's books before he became whatever the hell he's about to become. And I was not interested. But the idea is that's where acting comes in.
Yeah.
And that's what bothers me, because Bob, you talk about nonfiction, you're still acting.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
It's still an
absolutely.
acting job, and I think people lose track of that fact.
Right.
It'd be nice to narrate only things that I personally am deeply passionate about, but the
Now you got to
reality
write more
is,
books.
is the reality is that's not always the case. But I understand, at least intellectually and hopefully in my heart as well, the level of passion that the author has for whatever the subject is. Right
Yep.
now, I'm working on a title for Harper called Golden State. It's unsurprisingly, it's a history of California. The
Yeah.
author, who's a transplanted Californian, loves California, but also is very aware of the sort of ongoing contradictions that have been present for the entire history of the state and even before it was a state. And so I'm finding myself, personally, although I like visiting California, I have no desire to live there. But I'm finding myself caught up in the author's passion for living in California. And so I'm trying to deliver that sort of thing as I'm reading this title, uh, because, and I'm right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm a long way from the end of it. It's a pretty good sized book. But, when you make those connections, it's not that it's like, a walk in the park or whatever, but it makes it much easier to connect with the material when you understand the love and the deep desire the author has to tell you about this wonderful state where he loves to live.
Yeah. If one of the things, by the way, that's keeping you out of California is knowledge that Don lives there,
No,
I might know that his wife lives there, Lisa, and she's delightful. So,
I
you
have
can,
met Lisa and
yeah,
she is delightful.
yeah,
So we're
Yes.
50% here. All
yeah.
good. Okay. By the way, I'm looking on Audible here while we're talking, and you have 304 books listed, including these books, the Bible taking 3 years of your life to narrate approximately.
Well,
Based,
no, a year and a half roughly. But
what, for
yeah.
each one?
No, the first one was actually, again, because I had an engineer and a producer, a director. That one only took 11 months.
Okay. Sorry.
But
No, I
no,
resend
that's
that.
okay.
But one of the things I'm looking, as I look through your catalog, a lot of them are still stories. I mean,
Mm,
yes, it's nonfiction, but the Second World War, somebody's telling a
yeah.
story about what happened to them in
Yep.
the war.
Well, I
I'm
love
just
doing those
John
stories.
Adams. There's,
Yeah.
as I go through these, there's a bunch of great stories. Flying from the Black Hole, and it's somebody who's a B-52 navigator.
Yeah.
Uh, working on one of those planes, and it's got to be a fascinating story. And if I tell that, well, hey, we flew in the air, and I mean, you're going to be passionate. That author was passionate about what they were doing, and I
Yeah.
can see just in the titles that you've narrated, these are stories. They happen to be history. They happen to be nonfiction, but you're a storyteller. You're not sitting there just reading, you're telling some great story, and it looks like you have some very fascinating ones in your history.
Well, I've
Amazing
loved every
stuff. So
single one that I've done.
say that
I haven't
again?
always I loved every story that I've read, although I haven't always agreed with them
Yeah,
100%.
yeah. Okay,
So,
but
but
who
but that
gets a chance to read everything that they only agree with? It's pretty rare these days. And a good
right.
Yeah.
actor should be able to pull it off to where the audience thinks that you are into it, no
Yeah.
matter
Yep.
what's happening there, right?
Well, a perfect example is one of the books I did a few years ago was written by a guy who's been a lifelong fan of the New York Mets. When he was like 1969, when they won the World Series for the first time, he was a little boy,
Hmm.
and he remembers seeing on the back page of the paper the magic number countdown for the Mets that year. If I remember right, the Cubs were battling with the Mets, I think, for the
Yes.
East title, and so, yeah, and the Cubs looked like they were gonna coast home, and Johnny, you being a lifelong Cubs fan, I suppose that probably doesn't have happy associations for you,
I
but
have
for
a
this
status. I'm a lifelong White Sox fan, so
well,
that's how
oh,
bad
well,
that is.
then even more so, because when I moved to Chicago from Minnesota to go to college, I was a fan of the Twins, American League, so, of
Yeah,
course, I gravitated to the White Sox, not to the Cubs,
sadly.
and, yeah, my wife's family, which is lifelong Cubs fans, have never forgiven me,
Hmm.
but, Anyway, so, but this guy wrote this book that was, I think it was Fear and Loathing in Flushing or something like that was the name of his book.
Faith and Fear in Flushing.
There it is, Faith and Fear
Who's
in
the guy?
Flushing. He's a
I'll put
blogger,
the link up.
and yeah. Anyway, so but I didn't care about the Mets a fig, honestly, until I read that book, and then I caught his passion for the team. And it was like, ever since then, I've actually followed the Mets to some extent, just because I have these happy associations with reading this book. That was honestly, I thought it was brilliantly done. I noticed I never read reviews, by the way, but I did look at the reviews of that particular book, and somebody called me out on bad pronunciations of some of the names. I'm sure that's probably true, because back when I recorded that, I wasn't as meticulous about research as I am now. So I confess I probably missed a few, or just pronounced them the way they looked rather than actually taking the time to look it up.
Ah.
So
I will say right now, the Mets, and for my money, I'm a baseball fan, so I get the baseball package and watch everything.
Mhm.
But I think the Mets have the best announcing crew in the game right now.
I agree.
And,
They're
and
very
Rebecca
good.
Lee has a question. I'll never understand why one city needs 2 Major League Baseball teams. Let me
Well,
put it in
the
one
history of
word.
that goes a long ways.
Money.
Yes.
Then there you have it. That's the answer. And also, if they could do 3. People, if you love, I mean, Chicago there's an American and National League, so certainly towns like Chicago and New York can have more than one, and the Bay Area has what, 3?
Southern
So
California has 2. So I mean, we have the Dodgers and we have the Angels. So it just works out that some areas will support more than one, most won't.
Yeah.
If there's a big enough audience, they'll do it. And I think New York's kind of a diverse city. Is that correct? And
No,
no,
just left-handed albinos. That's all we have.
okay, yeah. So yeah. Anyway, but as you look through your catalog, what's quite obvious is you're a storyteller. And it's kind of funny. A lot of these things fall. Even looking at the titles, you instantly know it falls in the nonfiction category, but it's still some story that somebody is telling about an event that they are passionate about. And the reason you are getting hired to do hundreds of them are not because you read it dispassionately. It's because you read it as if you are the one passionate about the subject, and then sometimes you become passionate about it. So that's
Right.
fantastic. And that's where the acting comes in.
Yeah. Oh, of course it is.
So your background fits perfectly, but I don't know any nonfiction specialists, and there's not tons of them, but enough of them. They almost always have an acting background if they have a sustained career doing it.
Like Sean Pratt, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Sure.
easy to get a few books or a series from one author, but you better be good at storytelling if you're going to constantly get work over and over again. It's just a different animal. So hats off to you for doing that.
Well, Bob mentioned earlier about some of his work in theater in Chicagoland, Lake Forest.
Well, when I was in college, I was starting when I was in high school. I was in every play that I could be in. I loved, treading the boards, as it were. And so when I was in college, I got a chance to work as an apprentice at what was then called the Academy Festival Theater, which was held in the summers at Barra College in Lake Forest, Illinois. And the year that I started, I remember sitting on the steps of a stepladder, waiting for the manager of the apprentices to come and interview me. And down the hallway, I hear this amazing rumbling voice, and it's Jason Robards. Now, his name's not as familiar to people these days as he was a number of years ago, but he was a very, very well-known film and stage actor. And he had an amazing voice. I mean, he had one of those voices you could just listen to forever. And he goes walking by, and I'm just like, that was Jason Robards that walked past me. And then the guy comes out and he interviews me and he hires me on the spot. So a few weeks later, I'm in the costume room sewing silver lame onto a top hat because it's going to be used in the next production, which is Dames at Sea. Bernadette Peters came from New York to do the show in Chicago that summer, 1973. And so I'm sitting in the costume room sewing this on. I'm the only one in there, and Jason Robards walks in a dress shirt and his boxer shorts with a pair of slacks over his arm, and he says, "Pardon me, young man, but is there anybody here who can iron my pants for me?" And I said, and my mother had taught me to iron, so I said, "Well, I'll do it for you, sir." So he goes back to his dressing room, and I take the pants and I lay them out and I warm up the iron and I iron them and take them back down and give them. He's still sitting in his boxer shorts. And I give him his shorts. So that was my experience of ironing Jason Robards' pants. So the next show is, as like I said, is Dames at Sea, and I actually end up. I don't know if you know the show, but there's a Buddha statue that comes to life at one point during the show, and I ended up getting to be the guy inside the Buddha costume, and they've got these fiberglass sleeves on me that look just like the other pieces of the Buddha statue. And then at one point I come to life and I grab the neck of one of the cast members and shake them back and forth and so forth.
As Buddha will do, yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know enough about Buddha to answer that question. But anyway, so but at the after party, I'd acquired a girlfriend that summer. First time I ever dated anybody. And she asked me, because she was a big Bernadette Peters fan, she said, "Can you see if you can get an autograph from Bernadette when you're at the wrap-up party for the play?" And I said, "Sure, I'll ask." So I had a chance to chat with Bernadette a few times over the course of the run of the show. And so I went up to her and I said, "Bernadette, could I get your autograph?" And she looked at me and said, "Bob, you don't need my autograph. You're going to remember this summer for the rest of your life." Which, of course, here it is now, more than 50 years later, and I am remembering this for the rest of my life.
How's that
I
help your
said,
girlfriend?
so I said, "Well, my girlfriend wants the autograph." And she said, "Oh, well, in that case," and she took a piece of paper, wrote out an autograph and gave it to me. And then I gave it to Judy, was her name. And yeah, but I mean, that little, first of all, Bernadette was very young then too, not quite as young as me, but still, she was just getting started.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was her first hit show. And so for her to have the wisdom to say, 50 years from now, you're still going to remember this summer, that was pretty good insight. Now, I'm sure if I ran into her on the streets of New York, she wouldn't know me from Adam, but I would know her.
I bet she would.
Well, maybe, I don't know.
You make a lasting impression.
So I have a question. If somebody
Yeah.
were starting to, so let's fast forward all the way to now. If you knew somebody that was getting started in this business, what advice might you give them?
Well, it would depend on if they have any acting training at all or not, because getting some acting training would be the first thing I would suggest. Certainly, acting for voiceover or acting for audiobooks and so forth is a unique skill. And I would certainly strongly encourage somebody to study with a coach like Johnny, or there's lots of good coaches, and different personalities and different styles. So find somebody that fits for you, and then study with them for a while, and then go to somebody else and study with them for a while. But the other things I would say is, how often do you read out loud, and can you sustain it for a period of time? Right, Johnny? I mean, it's not like you go in and read a 30-second commercial, and even if they have you do it 20 times, you're done in a half an hour.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
At the absolute maximum.
Unless there's a lot of clients on the line, then you're all day.
Yes, and then it's a whole day session. That's true, but that's a completely different matter. But you're doing the same script over and over again.
Yeah.
By the time you're done with 3 hours of that, you've got it memorized. But reading out loud, reading with meaning and feeling for 3 or 4 or 6 hours in a day, that's a skill that requires a lot of practice. So, I encourage, if somebody asks me what are some things I can do to get started, one of the first things I tell them to do is start reading everything you read out loud, and read it with as much understanding as you can for the subject matter that you're reading. So
Do
if
you
you're reading
add,
a blog,
don't do that on the subway or train though, because Yeah. A
You
little
know what? My
off-putting, I
experience on the subway in New York is that there's a lot of people talking out loud
think.
to themselves or
Well,
to
yeah,
nobody.
Johnny's there
Ridiculous stuff.
often.
I
Yeah.
listen to my audiobooks on my subway
Oh,
usually.
there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Like,
almost never listen to my own audiobooks.
no, I
I
never.
mean,
That's too weird.
it's
It's like people say to you, "Hey, what are you doing?" "I'm listening to me." That just sounds weird to
yeah,
me.
and it is weird,
Yeah,
honestly.
I'm listening to, I've been doing a Grover Gardner, as a matter of fact.
Mm,
I did the whole Lyndon Johnson,
mm.
Robert Caro series. I've done 2 of those books, each are over 27 hours, so I did 2, then I took a break, and I'm listening to Phil Thron do Dads versus Zombies, which is very funny. I'm trying to listen to my friends a little bit, and Bob, preparing for this, I found some of your books that I wanna download to my, for
Well,
my
cool.
history. Yeah, so I will
Yeah.
do that.
Do the ones that are more recent since I've studied with you. That'll
Yeah, I'll
make
say,
it
yeah, I don't wanna do the ones where you weren't any good, just after you studied with me.
absolutely. Which, by the way, although you don't remember our first time of meeting, because I was just a face in the crowd at that point, but I think the second time that we met was at your first Splendiferous workshop that was connected with somewhat
The
the
time
well,
was
it was the same timing as APAC a couple of years after that.
yeah.
And so I remember signing up to go to that. I think we had met online, we were friends on Facebook or whatever, but I hadn't seen you in person since meeting you at that listeners lounge or maybe the following year. But again, we didn't have any conversation. But that I think is the first time where we actually spoke for at least a little while.
And I have to tell you, Bob, I owe you something of an apology, and I should have done it in New England when we were together. When you, Don, and I were all together at the, recent Audis in, LA,
In Los Angeles, yeah.
we were all at the, hotel, and I was sitting with Don and Lisa and Joanna, and then I was chatting with you for quite some time, and then you got up, remember? And so I have to tell you, I deliberately tried to see if I could get under your skin to see if I can make you something less than nice. You were looking for Nancy Wolfson, who
Yeah.
said she was gonna be there, and I know Nancy Wolfson, I've met her, but I kept saying, I pointed at almost everybody in the room. "Is that her? Is that her? Is that" I can't like an annoying little guy pulling on his shirt just to see how long before the nicest guy in the business
Hopefully I
turned ugly.
didn't slip to ugliness.
Oh, no, the worst you ever did was this. I said it I think the 15th time I did it, you went like this, you went
That sounds about right.
yeah.
I do that with my kids too when they were
Yeah,
little.
just a little look. "One more time, Johnny, one more time."
Tugging on daddy's coattails. Yeah.
So I apologize for I
Well,
did it
well,
deliberately
you're
too early.
forgiven, Johnny. I mean, automatically.
Did you even remember?
I do remember Johnny doing that, although I didn't have any notion that it was that many times. I think, I thought he was trying to help me. But
Initially, I was, but then I decided I don't see her anywhere. I'm just gonna mess with him.
I believe that it was our mutual friend Byron Wagner who had somehow managed to get my phone switched over so that it showed Nancy Wolfson when he sent me a message. And so he was playing me the whole time.
Oh.
Yes, I believe. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't confronted him
Now I'm
about it.
certain of it.
But
Yeah,
that does sound like something that Byron might do.
it does
He has a
indeed.
wonderful sense of humor, and I love
Yeah.
him to death. So, and he's been
We gotta
unfailingly
have
kind to
Byron
me.
you know what Byron does? He did this to a bunch of us at New England. He goes, "I wanna tell you guys" like, usually when you're about to leave a space that you're in, you're about to leave, he goes, "Oh, one more thing."
Yes.
Then he goes, "I gotta tell you a story." And you go, "Okay, but before I tell you the story, I gotta tell you 3 stories that lead to it."
So we're gonna settle in for the long haul here.
Yeah, it's really a pull up the lazy boy. It's gonna take a while.
So as we're getting to the end here, Bob, anything that you want to promote or tell people that they should pay attention to or fun things?
Well, I was gonna say quickly, and I noticed that, the lovely and talented Lisa Baarns, asked a question about, doesn't that Texas billionaire know about, and I don't remember, I think it scrolled off so I
Oh,
can't
I'll
see it, but
find it.
she referenced a, um, a service that provides audio versions of the numerous audio my my,
This
All the
puzzled me.
free
Did the
audio
Texas
versions
billionaire
available.
not know
oh,
about?
the U version, right,
Yeah.
app. Um, well, his goal was see, in order to use the U version, you have to have an active internet connection. So he
Ah,
wanted to make it available to people like, say, in South Africa, where they're miles from the nearest cell phone tower, and you can't download the audio for YouVersion, at least I don't think you can, so that you can listen to it anytime. The idea was that it would be available everywhere, even if you don't have a live internet connection, as long as you do for some period of time so you can download the audio. That was the goal
Okay.
on
Cool, cool,
that
cool.
one. So he was aware of those. In fact, we even talked about it when we were first starting to work on the project, and he was still trying to find which translation he wanted to use. And then the Berean Standard Bible, which is a really good modern translation. It's not like the Good News Bible was sort of tied up with, the colloquialisms of the time, so it
yeah.
sounds a little dated now.
Oh, yeah.
But he was trying to find a translation that was accurate, that was modern, but not locked into the current, latest thing.
Hey,
Um, but that would be easy to understand. So that's what he was searching for, and he found a good match with the Berean Standard folks in the Bible Hub. Interestingly, my oldest son is a pastor now in Nebraska, in a little town called Oxford, Nebraska, about 4 hours west of Omaha. And when he was in seminary, the Bible Hub was the website that all of his classmates at the seminary and him went to for resources for Greek and Hebrew and Bible study and all of that kind of thing. So it was kind of cool. And I didn't know about that when I started working on this project. He told me later, he said, "Oh, the Bible Hub, we all use it here at the seminary."
We
So,
we need to bring this to a close, Bobby
okay.
boy. It's been delightful having. Is there anything you want to plug or tell us about coming up that we should?
Well, I've mentioned Golden State, which will be out sometime early next year from Harper.
All right.
That's the one I'm working on right now, and I don't remember the title of the one that's after that. I don't know if you find this too, but I when I'm working on something, I'm completely focused on it,
Yeah.
and as I'm preparing it too. But then when I'm done, it's like, and I go on to the next one, and somebody might say, "What was the third book ago that you
Oh,
did?" And I can't even tell you the title.
I tend to work on more than one title at a time, so it's not
Ah,
quite the same.
okay.
But listen, one thing I want to say, everybody listening and watching this, thank you so much, Don, and I appreciate it. We're coming to the
My
close of
pleasure.
another great year. We've brought this to you. If you like this, please share it. Please make comments. The comments really send it. Really help send the message out to everybody. A little like is nice, but a comment means so much more.
yep.
Uh,
Oh,
Don, anything you want to add?
yeah. And even in the Facebook promotion, if you ever see me promoting it in a Facebook group, if you make a comment, it gets to so many more people. So be sure to do that. Also, we're at Thanksgiving weekend here as this is being recorded, and we have a Black Friday sale that's going on. So if you go ahead and purchase the Heller seminar, I've got some bundles going on, or you're looking at Studio One, or you're looking at RX, or all the other stuff I have on vojumpstart.com. Black Friday sale starts today, and just a coupon code Black Friday 2024. So all that's going out right now. You can start doing that. That ends next Monday. So if you're watching this on the replay and it's beyond that, then that will be over. But there's a Black Friday sale going on right now. So
Yeah.
we're excited about that. And I don't remember, Johnny, for next week. Do you remember at all who we have coming on?
I can look in 1 second. If you
Okay.
people wait, let me see, look at the Google Drive. There it is. Show guests. Next week is Eric Priestman.
All right.
Right?
Eric's great. Eric's great. Okay. So as always, first, I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. And if you're watching this on the replay, then I hope your next Thanksgiving is great, or the previous one was great.
Hope you're enjoying the turkey sandwich. Yeah.
Okay. So as always, we're happy you're here. We're thankful. We'll see you next week, and be sure to share this, pass it on to other people. Have a fantastic one. We'll see you on the
Happy
wire.
Bye
Thanksgiving.
all, and thanks,
Bye-bye.
Bob.
My pleasure.